This is from the Rooster magazine here in Colorado. A Colorado man in court on drug charges attempted to show the respect for the judge by removing his cowboy hat, but instead accidentally dropped a small bag of cocaine on the floor, which immediately grabbed the attention of the deputies in the room. "Hey, cowboy, you forgot the first rule of drug club. Don't bring your drugs to your drug court hearing." I wanted to share that story because I'm going to get into it in a minute on what that has to do with our ego defenses for today's show. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessica Disbrow, licensed social worker and founder of Higher Consciousness Healing, an innovative mental health practice in Lakewood, Colorado, offering community building, free online education, individual and group services, and specializing in services for the millennial generation. For more information, please visit www.higherconsciousnesshealing.org. Right now you're watching our live video blog that we air every Saturday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, where we talk about different mental health topics from a spiritual and scientific perspective. So welcome to the show. Just a friendly reminder, if you have any questions or comments, please ask them during the show because there is a little bit of a lag time on Facebook Live. So I want to make sure to get to those if they're appropriate, because sometimes at the end, I could be sitting around for a few minutes waiting for those questions to roll in. So it's just easier and more convenient this way for everybody. All right, last week we talked about signs of unconscious resistance. So I wanted to follow up with our next episode on talking about other kinds of unconscious behaviors that a lot of us do and that are just really inherent to us as humans. So today we're going to be talking about unconscious ego defenses. And I'm breaking it into two parts because there's a lot of them. So I'm just going to cover the basic ones, the ones I see most often and I think could be most relatable and helpful to you all watching in the audience. So the 5 that I'm going to cover today are specifically from Anna Freud. That's right, Sigmund Freud's daughter. She actually added to his work. He originally came up with the concept of ego defenses, and then she expanded upon that. So let's take a look at what ego defenses are. So Freud thought of them as unconscious reactions to avoid anxiety. And really what they're doing is they're mediating between the pressures of our basic instincts and our internalized societal values. What does that mean exactly? So it means what we think we should be doing based on society or our upbringing. And we kind of internalize those messages and they can become part of our basic operation. So let's dial back. I've talked about ego in a few episodes now, but I want to make sure that we all have the same definition because there's so many ways to look at it. And so I'm going to give you a really basic way to think about it. Our ego is the self we think we are. It's the constructed identity that we have for ourselves. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Ultimately, though, we are not who we think we are. We are not this constructed identity of our past, of our values, of our belief systems, what political party we identify with. That's not really our true core. And ultimately, I believe, and I hope you agree with me watching, that we are conscious energy. We have a soul, if you will. And that soul is in our human suit. And our human suit is causing that ego, based on our brain functioning. If you want more information about this, definitely check out past episodes 17 and 18, and I really dive into identity and the ego. So there'll be some really clear definitions there if you're interested in learning more. All right. Now, before I get into the 5 common defenses, I do want to touch upon the difference between ego defenses and coping mechanisms, because they're different. Ego defenses are unconscious, they're really rigid, and coping mechanisms are conscious. They're choices that we're making with a lot of awareness, and they're flexible. Now, sometimes we can have coping mechanisms that are dysfunctional. We're not saying that all coping is a good thing. Self-medicating through drugs and alcohol is a really common dysfunctional coping mechanism. But it's conscious. You made the conscious decision to do that. It might become a pattern and it might feel impulsive and become reactionary, but you still made that decision in the first place. So it's important to remember that these ego defenses are not mutually exclusive, and they're kind of confusing because multiple ones can be happening at the same time, and the way that we define things and conceptualize things with words, it's only so good, right? Because ultimately we're kind of like making this stuff up to some degree. So Anna Freud took some common behaviors that she was seeing and made up these conceptualizations, and then people added to them. So it's not a hard and fast rule for any of these, so bear with me, but I'm going to try and give you the clearest definitions I can for you to help understand those deeper levels of unconsciousness that you might be carrying around with you. And remember, they're super common. I'm definitely at fault for some of these for sure. I think we all are, so just kind of, put your ego to the side a little bit because these are pretty basic. All right, so number 1 for common ego defenses is repression. So that's when you bury unwanted thoughts, feelings, memories that are painful or are causing some kind of internal conflict. So if you recall the story that I shared at the beginning with that cowboy, he repressed the memory of putting drugs in his hat. And in the moment, he played out what he thought would be socially acceptable, which is to take off his hat in front of the judge. And so he's feeling conflicted about using cocaine, probably as a coping mechanism. And so he kind of buries that in his memory and really kind of buries the fact that that's just a really bad idea to bring your drugs to your drug court hearing, right? So that's a great example of that. Number 2 is projection. And we covered this last week in how we play out things around resistance. But projection actually goes a lot deeper than that. So it's when someone projects unwanted feelings and thoughts onto someone else and denies that they're doing it themselves. An example of that is somebody who gets really angry on the road at other people driving aggressively and driving in an unsafe way. But really, that person themselves, they're driving aggressively and they're driving in an unsafe way, but they deny that and instead project that onto the other drivers. So that's a really great example. And this is something that we all do. I see it all the time. It's amazing how people deny things that they feel uncomfortable with or that they feel is causing some sort of conflict and then project it out onto other people. And whether the other person is doing it or not is beside the point. Something I really encourage is that when we are feeling negatively towards someone else and we are feeling angry or upset, that whatever the situation with the other person is, we turn it back on us. So instead of that driver getting angry at that other car, they can stop and say, okay, what am I doing to be aggressive behind the road? What am I doing that's dangerous on the road? Because a lot of times when we stop and reflect and turn that back around on us, we can find things that we're doing that we probably didn't want to admit to ourselves. And then we can resolve those conflicts. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter what those other people are doing. It only matters what we're doing because that's what we can control. We can't control other people. We can just work on ourselves. So that's projection. Number 3, turning against the self. So this is the opposite of projection in a lot of ways. And basically, you're getting upset and angry at someone else for doing something that's, valid. So you turn that unacceptable thought or feeling to yourself. So a really great example of that would be children just by nature internalize a lot of things, and especially with their parents. So let's say their parent is being abusive and they don't want to admit that their parent is doing something wrong. So instead, they internalize that, they turn it on the self, and they say, I'm doing something wrong. Does that make sense? And that's a really basic survival mechanism, because as children, we need our parents to survive in a pretty significant way. So that's an example of turning against the self. Number 4, undoing. And this is where you deny an unacceptable thought or feeling out of guilt, and then you try and undo it. An example of this would be a boss who has the hots for his assistant and kind of denies his attraction. And so then instead he buys his wife a really expensive gift. Because ultimately he's feeling really guilty and he's trying to undo it and make it go away. It's no, I really love my wife and she deserves lots of good things, so I'm going to focus on that, and denying the rest. Number 5 is regression. And that's returning to an earlier state of development, level of functioning, or behavior in order to avoid the anxieties of the present and really dealing with whatever's going on in the moment. An example of this would be a woman whose husband isn't giving her enough attention, so she starts acting out like a child, like she did when she was a kid trying to get her parents' attention. Make sense? Okay. So remember, awareness is key to resolving any of these dysfunctions and unconsciousness, because we all do different variations of these and sometimes multiple ones at the same time. And so it's good for us to gain some awareness around that. Now, the book that I was using to get most of this material today is called, if you want to check it out, it's called Ego Psychology. I know it's going to be backwards for you guys. Ego Psychology and Social Work Practice. So, I think it's really great as a social worker. It might be a little too academic for you all in the audience, but I did want to make reference to where I got this material for today's show as we wrap up. All right, I haven't seen any questions or comments, but now's your last chance to bring those into the show. I really appreciate everybody watching in the audience, and I'm assuming that most of this information is pretty clear and straightforward and easy to understand. I'm always working to improve the show and make things better for y'all, so definitely feel free to send me a message or make a comment. I'd really appreciate that. Next week, we're going to be talking about more ego defenses. So today we covered Anna Freud, and next week we're going to be covering some other ego defenses that people have added on to that since then. So more on that next week. All right, I don't see any questions or comments. One more thing that I wanted to mention, along with always improving the show, I want you all to feel free to make suggestions about future topics to be covered, because I want you all to feel like you're part of the show, and I definitely want to be taking those into considerations as we're moving forward. All right, I see some really positive comments thanking me for the show. You're definitely welcome. I really appreciate everybody watching in the audience. This stuff is kind of hard. I've had people watch the show and be like, I have to be in a certain kind of mind frame to really watch and absorb and really get it. And it's because of our unconscious defenses to not want to incorporate some of this information, because it is a lot of work and sometimes reveals some things that we probably don't want to see and that we might be having unconsciously denied for a long time. So I really appreciate you all sticking with it and thinking about these things on a deeper level. All right. I hope to see you all next week, and take care.